percentages, converting from fractions and decimals with number chips. And this is the winter version. So this is a lot of fun for the students to practice. It's a digital lesson, and it starts out explaining that a percentage is just a comparison out of 100. So 45% means 45 out of 100. And it gives the students some very basic decimals to percentages. So if we read this decimal correctly, it's 56 hundredths, which is the same as 56 hundredths as a fraction, which would make it 56% because we're comparing out of 100. 73 hundredths as a fraction, 73%, and so on. And then one whole is going to be 100%. Now, students are going to start on slide 3, and they have these number chips that are movable. They just click and hold on the edge and they can move them into place. So they're just going to do these very simple conversions from decimals to percentages. So 12 hundredths, and they're just going to click and hold on the 12 and move it into place, 12%. So these are very simple. This first slide gives students a chance to practice moving the chips. And then again, one whole would be 100%. And so on. They can finish that. Now, another way to convert a decimal to a percentage is by moving the decimal point 2 places to the right. So here, if we move 62 hundredths 2 places to the right, we get 62%. This one, if we move 2 places to the right, 174%. And if you're moving 2 places to the right, but there's no number here, you have to add a 0. That would make it 30%, not 3%. So the next slide is a little bit more challenging. Here, if they move the decimal point 2 places to the right, they're going to get 70%. Over here, we have 7%. So again, moving the decimal point 2 places to the right. Now, to convert a fraction to a percentage, we need to change the fraction to a decimal. Okay, so here we're going to change this fraction first to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 5. Then we get 45 hundredths, which is 45 hundredths as a decimal, which is 45%. Now 12 fiftieths, we multiply the numerator and denominator by 2, we get 24 hundredths, or 24 hundredths as a decimal, or 24%. So students are going to be trying that on the next 3 slides. Here they're going to change their fraction to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. So I can see that I have to multiply by 5. If I multiply the denominator by 5, I have to multiply the numerator by 5 also. That gives me 30 hundredths, which would be 30 hundredths as a decimal, which would be 30%. Same thing here, we want 100 in our denominator. So I can see that I have to multiply by 2. If I multiply 41 times 2, I get 82 hundredths. And then we're going to ahead and convert that to a decimal and a percent. So they're going to practice that on the next 2 slides, just changing that denominator to 100. Now, sometimes you can't directly convert the denominator to 100. You may need to simplify your fraction first. So if I have 18 fortieths and I simplify by dividing the numerator and denominator by 2, I get 9 twentieths. Now I can multiply and get 100 in the denominator and then change it to a decimal and a percentage. 12 75ths, if I simplify by dividing numerator and denominator by 3, I get 4 25ths, and that's pretty easy to convert. Go ahead and convert to a fraction with 100 in the denominator. So students are going to be doing that on the next 2 slides. Simplify first. So here if I divide by 3, numerator and denominator, I get 2 fifths. Now I can change it to a fraction with 100 in the denominator by multiplying by 20. That gives me 40 hundredths as a fraction, 40 hundredths as a decimal, which is 40%. Same thing on the next one. And they'll be doing the same thing on the next slide also. Now, sometimes it's not possible to change that fraction to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. So in this case, I have 5/8, and I'm just going to take the numerator divide by the denominator. 5 divided by 8, using long division. And here's an example of how that works. The next slide, most of the problems done for them. They're going to use these number chips. And they also have a movable decimal point so they can move it into the correct place in their answer. So here 8 goes into 10 one time, so I'm going to move my 1. 8 times 1 is 8. I subtract, I get 2, bring down 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 8 times 2 is 16. Subtract, I get 4, bring down a 0. I have 40. And then 8 goes into 40 evenly 5 times. So now I have my decimal. If I move that decimal point 2 places to the right, my decimal point's going to go here. So I'll have an answer of 12.5%, or 12 5/10%. The next slide, the very last one, they're going to do all of the division themselves, as well as move that decimal point into the correct place. So, good challenge for the students and a good practice for long division also. So this is the winter version of percentages converting from fractions and decimals with number chips.